equal human beings. This is one of the most feminist organizations I've ever seen in my whole long life, so I'm very proud to be here. First, I'm going to tell you about myself, about what led me to call myself a feminist, how the feminist movement continues to inspire me, even today, particularly today, and what might happen next. In 1972, I was asked to run the ACLU Women's Rights Project with then Professor Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I was just 27 years old, a recent graduate of Harvard Law School, where she had also attended, and I had, before that, graduated from Vassar College with a degree in mathematics. It was in law school that my feminist feelings were awakened amazingly strongly, starting with how women were treated in class. There were 6% of the class was females, 32 women out of 565. We weren't called on at all by our professors. One day when I mustered my courage to speak, the eminent constitutional law professor, Paul Freund, made fun of me as I was expressing my upset about a case called Gessert against Cleary, which involved a Michigan statute that said it was perfectly fine and not unconstitutional for the state of Michigan to require that any woman who worked in a bar had to have her husband or her father present at the time. The whole class joined in laughing at me, with the professor leading the laughter, and I was really both traumatized and just in stone about how strong I was going to turn into a feminist after that. Women at the law school weren't allowed in the only eating club that all male students were asked to join. We were not allowed on the squash courts where all male students can play. In fact, one day I disguised myself as a man to play with my then husband, and I had my hair, which was very long, up in a hat, and the old man that was running the courts came running after me, screaming I had to get off the courts. You may remember let me say slightly even more importantly, when we were graduating, many firms said they did not hire women. One firm told me they had hired their one woman for the year, and one firm told me they would not hire me because they were going to offer my husband a job. You may remember in the RBG documentary, when Justice Ginsburg said she couldn't get a job in any New York City law firm because they wouldn't hire her. After I graduated from law school, the women's movement of the 1970s was in full swing. I enthusiastically became part of it. I had been living with my husband in New York City for 2 months when the very famous Women's March down Fifth Avenue took place. The police had cordoned off half of the avenue for us, but we spread out and took over the whole avenue and marched from uptown to downtown. That march was for equal rights, for reproductive freedom and choice over our own bodies, and against the Vietnam War. In fact, as I said, we had taken up the whole avenue. Gloria and I were marching together with a sign depicting the My Lai massacre. I had met Gloria 2 months earlier when I was vice president of NOW, and I needed her to speak on the, for the then, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think out of phrases, for the Equal Rights Amendment, which was popping around now in the Senate. And I was organizing all the pro-testimony for the Equal Rights Amendment, and Gloria had me draft what she was saying. So I testified during those hearings with her as a representative now, and I remember very cheekily saying in my young age that I was then speaking for all women on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment. By 1972, things were happening. Title IX of the Education Amendments was passed that guaranteed women the equal right to participate in all federally funded sports and other educational activities. I worked on that with Olympic gold medalist Donna de Verona, a swimmer who had won 2 gold medals that year. Simultaneously, a big abortion case I know you've heard of called Roe v. Wade was on the way to the Supreme Court. But at the same time, a much less known case called Reed against Reed had been accepted by the Supreme Court, and that case was very, very important for our rights. That case involved a father and a mother who were divorced, whose son had died, and the issue was who had the right to administer the son's estate. The Idaho law required that the father be preferred over the mother because he was male. She brought a lawsuit saying that's unfair, that's unconstitutional. By the time it was on its way to the Supreme Court, then Professor Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the brief in that Reed case. And when the court decided in favor of Sally Reed that it was unconstitutional for the man to be preferred, it was our first constitutional victory in the history of this country. Prior to that, now that was 46 years ago. That case actually was the inspiration for the ACLU Women's Rights Project. Before this case, before the Reed case, the Supreme Court had held that it was fine for the state of Illinois to keep women from practicing law. Women had not had, as I've said before, and I want to point out that Itzel said the same thing. I'm responding and saying, yes, Itzel. Back 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. Before that, married women could not own property in their own names or sign contracts in their own names. The mission of the ACLU Women's Rights Project, which got started then in 1972, was to ensure that women and girls would have equal rights with men, to establish that the principles of the United States Constitution apply equally to women as well as men. Just as we were getting underway, literally moving into the offices where I had put a sign, a big yellow sign saying women working, because we had a little part cut off. Ruth loved that sign. A case called Frontiero v. Richardson was making its way to the Supreme Court. And they had accepted it, and I began working with now Justice Ginsburg. We were able to file a brief and make an oral argument before the court. I was very proud to have my name under Ruth's on that brief. Writing it was a demanding and totally exhausting process. She is so meticulous that every single word had to be right. It was not about concepts, it was about being very specific. And the date for the argument was set. We got the brief in, the date for the argument was set. Soon we were heading to the Supreme Court. Our client was a woman Air Force officer who had been denied housing and medical benefits for her husband, who was only partly dependent on her for his support. Benefits that all male officers got for their wives, regardless of how dependent they were on for their husband's support. So on a cold day in January, we proceeded to fly down to Washington. We arrived at the court, which is so imposing, all marble-filled, all busts of men from centuries back, not a woman in sight. And we were led to the counsel table in the courtroom. I sat there next to Ruth as she argued her first Supreme Court case. She had not argued in Reed. This is the first time she argued in the court. The whole setting was totally intimidating, but as she spoke, I saw that the 9 male justices were transfixed. They just stared at her. Not a single question, which is unheard of in the Supreme Court, not a single question was asked of her. She was, of course, brilliant. After the hearing, Marty, her husband, the practical one in the family, told Ruth that he had to stay for a meeting with a client in Washington and began to tell her how to get back to New York on the shuttle. And she looked completely dazed, like she had no idea what he was talking about and how. And I said, Marty, I'll make sure she gets back. So that's what we did. I mean, we went home. And when the decision came, about 4 months later, it was a victory. Sharon Frontiero got her husband the benefits. But we didn't love that opinion because even though the consensus was that the statute in question was discriminatory, a majority of the court didn't feel that sex discrimination should be taken as seriously as race discrimination. They just didn't think it was bad or as bad. In fact, it would take 23 more years and the Virginia Military Institute case for Ruth herself, now Justice Ginsburg, to take on the male-only policy of that school. Because of her majority opinion in the VMI case, from that day forward in 1996, sex discrimination, like a male-only state school, would now have to have an exceedingly persuasive reason to exist on the books. So we've talked about some of our early feminist work in the 1970s, work in which we challenged laws that discriminated against women. Now the question is, what's happening with women today in the real world, 45 years after I sat at the council table with Ruth? Let's review some statistics that I found recently in the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times headline stories that the still sorry state of women's inequality still continues to exist. A USC study on the film industry using sophisticated software showed that 4,000 men versus 2,000 women were doing the on-screen talking in films. There were 7 times as many male screenwriters and 12 times as many male directors. As for casting directors, there were twice as many men. These statistics should not be surprising in an industry where 80% of the top executives at film studios are male. Sexual harassment and even rape has been in the headlines for months. Many of the charges are against men like Harvey Weinstein, Charlie Rose, Les Moonves, and of course Bill Cosby. And there are more just in the entertainment industry. These charges have spawned the Me Too and Time's Up movements. And needless to say, the Brett Kavanaugh situation is a direct result of one woman and then more women feeling empowered enough to speak the truth after 35 years. You know, in a way, I'm sorry I had to drag you, we had to drag you all away from your television sets, because this is one of those days in history, and I have no idea how we're going to see it. I mean, I was thinking of TiVoing, but all day, every channel. I don't know. It's so obvious what's going on in Washington right now that I'm not going to belabor the point. I just want you to know that it's a learning lesson, and I think it is something we should talk to our children and grandchildren about. In fact, I now have 2 cases referred by Time's Up, that spawned by Me Too and Time's Up, that involve women who have been sexually harassed working for the Marine Corps, as well as sex discrimination cases for women dock workers, stunt women, and Teamsters. My own awakening about workplace harassment hit hard one day in 1982, shortly after I arrived at the William Morris Agency for a new job. The only woman in the television department came into my office, shut the door, and told me that she had been raped by the top-earning male TV executive. After reporting this to the president, she told me that he, the president, offered her a cruise around the world to buy her silence. She agreed to the offer. Then a few years later, when I left William Morris to develop and produce a big-budget movie, Navy SEALs, that I had dreamed up with a SEAL friend, as we readied for actual production, the director announced to me that if I went on location, he would quit. That would be the end of the movie. Why would he quit? Because I'm a woman. Simple fact. Sexual harassment and sex discrimination are by no means confined to the entertainment world. Women are 50.3% of current law school graduates, yet they make up just 35% of partners in law firms. Their share of equity partnerships remains at 20%. That has not changed at all in recent years, and only 32% of law school deans are women. Women in tech under 25 years of age earn 29% less than their male counterparts. Women hold 11% of executive positions in Silicon Valley companies and own only 5% of tech startups. Somebody was talking about starting a company. Absolutely. Please. Google's overall workforce is 69% male. Tech staff is 80% male. Corporate leadership is 75% male at Google. There are 25 women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. In 2016, of 132 companies and 34,000 employees, women who negotiated for promotion were 30% more likely than men to be labeled intimidating, bossy, or aggressive. City councils, women are not doing well at all. In New York City, 13 of 51 are women. In Chicago, 13 of 50. In Houston, 4 of 16. In Philadelphia, 6 of 17. And Los Angeles, 2 of 15. National parks. Taking a look at national parks under the aegis of the federal government, only 9 national park sites are dedicated to women's history. out of 411. Less than 8% of publicly viewed statues are women, 8% women. And finally, the world of science. Two noted female scientists, Doctors Jones and Lundblad at the Salk Institute, founded by polio vaccine pioneer Jonas Salk, filed suit last year saying it's an old boys club, a, quote, culture where women are paid less and not promoted and are denied opportunities. Those two lawsuits were just settled, but a lawsuit brought by another woman, also a full professor whose science has been widely lauded, is on track to go to trial. Meanwhile, internal documents that were leaked to the magazine Science exposed long-standing gender tensions at the Institute. Veteran Salk scientist Inder Verma was accused of actively impeding women's advancement there. And now we learn that 8 women made sexual harassment allegations against Verma, who has since resigned from Salk. In June, I noticed a headline in San Diego's Union Tribune that read, "Sexual harassment in academic science, engineering, medicine needs system-wide change." The article was backed up by detailed research and a report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Predictably, problems women have in the world of science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, which everybody having to do with girls Inc. knows we care about. A study by the Department of Commerce revealed that while women make up half of the college-educated workforce, they are only 25% of the STEM workforce. However, there is hope. And I am going to start showing you some slides. If I have my clicker here someplace. I do have it. I got these pictures, these images from the Getty Images, and they did this incredible book called Why I March that came out right after the January 21st, 2017 march. I want to show you a couple of places that are just overflowing with people that you can see. I'm not going to, this is obviously Washington. There are a couple of others with people that have all kinds of posters. I'm going to read some of them off in a minute to you. Here you will see more posters. I love the "If I Make My Uterus a Corporation, Will You All Stop Regulating It?" If there's anybody here over 65, I mean. So I'm going to try to do this in a coordinated way. You can see that we're still just somewhere, all over, everywhere, but pretty soon we're going to have some places that we're going to be able to see. I like this very much. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. Okay, so let's see if I can figure out a way to do two things at exactly the same time. I'm going to talk about where everybody was. We marched from Alaska to Antarctica, from Austria to Ghana, and I'm showing you pictures in a minute, from Kosovo to New Zealand, from India to Israel, from Poland to Macau. And the signs were wonderful. And if you can do two things at once, you'll see what I'm talking about. These are cities from all over the world. New York, obviously, is I believe New York had 750,000, as did Los Angeles. You'll see people everywhere. And this was that one day, and you will also see climates different because of what was going on. You see Denver, you see San Jose, Helena, Montana, Fight Like a Girl Somewhere, Seattle, Equality for All, and I like that one a lot. I am going to show you some places that you might not have known. These are Native Americans. And now we have Boise with its weather. There's Manhattan with the bridge, with Pussy Power up there on the top. And now I'm going to start reading, and you'll see, okay? So I'm going to read, and maybe I'll click at the same time. The signs were wonderful. The signs say, my dignity is not up for grabs, and neither are we. To I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. From strong women unite to my body, not yours. To sexual assault is not locker room talk. From I lived in the 50s, I don't want to go back. So true. To the future is female, rise up. To babies for paid family leave. To grandma didn't cross the border so I could be grabbed. From I am queer, I will not disappear, to real men are feminists, to build bridges, not walls, to power, to the peaceful, to girls just want to have fundamental rights. From make America kind again to there is no planet B. From my America welcomes refugees to as a woman, my country is the world. From make facts great again to if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And penguins for peace. I'm going to catch us up with these pictures, which I love, and you can just read where they are from everywhere. It's a little hard for me to see. Oh, it's up there. Good, okay. Lots from New York. And people that went out in the most horrible weather for this. It's just amazing to me, and I love it. And now we're going to see around the world. Amsterdam, London, there he is in New York again. Chicago, Warsaw, Poland, Berlin. Got Make Facts Great Again. Lima, Peru. Women's rights are human rights, and she, I think, is in New Zealand. Nairobi, Kenya. I mean, you believe people all over the world got together for this march. It's just South Africa. This is, okay. And Cape Town, Kenya. Then we're back again. The sign, Women's March in 2017. No Planet B. London, Amsterdam, Barcelona, London, Dublin, Bulgaria, Paris, lots of people, Lisbon, Paris, Amsterdam, Manchester, England, Oslo, Paris. Paris played a big role in this. Paris, Krakow, bridges. Tel Aviv, Israel, Macau, Sydney. These people, and Antarctica are on a boat. And there we have the penguins. And finally, not finally, but the one that I put at the end, feminism backed by popular demand, which is exactly what seems to be happening. I just want to tell you that seeing those photos and reading the posters has caused me to reflect on what I think feminism really is. Did you see how diverse a crowd we are? All the issues and all the marchers are part of the feminist movement. We all fit together as we march together. It made me begin to think of feminism as a big bus with 4 big wheels. And that bus is motoring toward a country that guarantees, as its first wheel, equal rights for women, which includes reproductive freedom, which men have and we do not. It includes equal rights for people of color and diverse ethnic origins. The third wheel, equal rights for people of all different sexual orientations. And the last but not least, 4th wheel, is everything necessary for peace and security for people, including the fight to combat climate change, gun violence, have a decent education, and decent health care. Those are the 4 wheels that I'm calling, motoring my bus called feminism. You cannot be a feminist and want to shed any of those wheels. So if anybody is worried, you are somebody who doesn't want one of those wheels because they have to all be there. And I am obviously thinking about something like voting rights, which is part of this, because if we had democracy in this country, we wouldn't have to have a group of people, groups of people fighting to get a right as basic to democracy as voting is. Which, of course, leads me to say, please, you are going to vote. I know you're going to vote. Tell everybody you know. November 6th, a really important day in the history of America, and what we are saying about this bus is these are values that power the bus and that are embedded in the United States Constitution. So, how are we doing in achieving that first wheel of the bus, equal rights for women? Fortunately now, complementing the great things Girls Inc. is doing, there's a new public service campaign that encourages girls ages 11 to 15 to get involved in STEM. And corporations seem finally to be on board. There are Barbie-inspired coding lessons by Mattel, GE, Google, IBM, Microsoft, and Verizon are all behind a new big advertising campaign. Big new programs in space science, cybersecurity, mechanical engineering, robotics, and computer science have been introduced by the Girl Scouts. A Google research scientist, a woman named Maya Gupta, says to girls, don't just solve the problem, write the code. The article where I learned about this was in the New York Times 2 weeks ago and was entitled Convincing Girls That Tech, Science, and Robots Are Up Their Alley. All this is a complete endorsement of the mission of Girls, Inc. What with Me Too and Time's Up movements, there has been a recent flurry of feminist activity and a decisive uptick in the use of the word feminist. In case you are one of the seemingly evolved people who has made fun of that word, if you are still wondering if that word describes you, or if you are just starting to think it might, you are in good company. Justice Ginsburg, on the heels of the explosive opening of RBG, described herself as a flaming feminist. So finally, what I hope I have conveyed today is that those of us who have been around for a while have been working very, very hard to achieve equal rights for girls and women. We have put a lot on the line working for women's rights, and yes, we all have still a lot to do. A long way still to travel on that feminist bus. The label of this talk is Girls Have the Right. I want to add, girls have the obligation. I want to ask you to continue to work for justice, liberty, and equality, to remember not only that women and girls have the right, but also the obligation to end our second-class status, to continue the fight for our rights and the rights of coming generations of girls. Thank you. Thank you. Okay? You did a great job. Well, thank you. Thank you.